governance is more of a mindset. Unfortunately, what most small businesses think about is that it's rules and controls, and yes, that is part of it. And the mindset that a small business should have is, I am building a business now. If I want this business to succeed in the next 5, 10, to be there for 20 years, what do I have to do in order for that business to be there in 20 years?
Different stakeholders, ranging from the financiers, the staff members, the board members, even the community. There are so many different expectations of us as an organization. And many times to be able to balance these expectations is one of the biggest challenges that will cause friction.
We should all understand that actually corporate governance is a source of value. Enterprise is the way that will drive Africa's economic development. We must reset the perception that we are untrustworthy people, that we are an untrustworthy continent.
Everything starts and ends with governance. The way your organization is governed will determine how it will grow. With proper governance, your organization is safe. It will go heights even in your absence. An investment in your governance board is actually an investment in the right direction.
We are looking at how can we maximize the board, how can entrepreneurs like yourself, how can investors like yourselves maximize the board so that, we support businesses to have good governance structures, because we know even when you have the best idea, if you have a poor governance structure, sometimes it will not see the light of day. But before I invite our panelists, Bobo, if you can help me get a microphone. I would like to get your expectations across the room. What are you hoping to get from this session? That will also guide our discussion. So we'll just go through the room and just get a few of your expectations coming into this room. What are you expecting to hear, or what are some of the things you would like us to discuss?
I want to hear about some of the things that we may be taking for granted, but are actually wrong practices. So open mind and willingness to learn from mistakes and successes.
Anyone else?
I think a lot of organizations are struggling, especially in this particular part. It's probably the last part that most organizations think about, especially startups. And so when it comes to issues around due diligence, this is the one place where a lot of them underscore. So I'm also keen to hear, what are some of the things that you're recommending?
I would also love to hear about how to manage board expectation, especially in social enterprises. Thank you.
So I'd like to understand, how do you incentivize the management to practice good governance? Because most folks feel that, I don't need an elaborate finance team, I don't need an elaborate reporting team, because I know my numbers and that's it. Why do I need an elaborate reporting system? Because everything's that I need to know, which is cash in bank, stock, and inventory, I have all of that.
Yeah, I like the conversations already, so that our panel has a lot of, they have a lot to bring to the table. So ladies and gentlemen, I will not go up on the stage because I want it to be interactive, but our panel will. So allow me to introduce our panel. I'll start with, they say ladies first, right? So a hand clap for the first lady. Gladys Kavuma. They will have a chance to introduce themselves, so I'll not go into that. Our second panelist is Pascal Mandawun. He's also one of the entrepreneurs that we support. He will introduce himself. And finally, Simon Rutega. A hand clap for our panel, please.
And good afternoon, everyone who is braving the graveyard shift. It's not easy to have a panel at 3:30 p.m. So please hit us with those questions, especially about a subject that is riveting for some and boring for others and unnecessary for most. My name is Gladys Kavuma, and I am here wearing 3 hats. I am an independent non-executive director at NCBA Bank Uganda. I'm also a member of Nairobi Business Angel Network, so I am an investor. And I am also a venture partner with Obudu Capital, which is a climate tech fund that we are setting up. I was previously an operator, so I have worked in the startup environment and can confidently speak to how governance can impact a business. I'm happy to be here and to share my experience with everyone. Thank you, Brenda.
Thank you, Gladys. Over to you, Pascal.
Thank you so much. Pascal Mandaun is my name. I'm the founder and executive chairman of NCOT Microfinance. We have been here for the last 16 years now. Thank you.
Simon.
Good afternoon to all of you, and thank you for choosing this session. And we look forward to having a good conversation with you. I know there's a lot of choice this afternoon, so the fact that you've chosen this session, I think, shows that you have a keen interest in corporate governance. I sit here as the chair of the Deal Flow Facility Advisory Committee, and that's an initiative that brings together or matches investors and investees. And we have seen how important corporate governance is, but I'm also I have a financial advisory firm, and I've worked in the financial sector for a very long time. So I've also had experience with investing and investees, private equity, both large, small, and corporate governance is an important component. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you. And just before we get into our session, for those who are not familiar with the Deal Flow Facility, the Deal Flow Facility is an EU-funded program, so she'll briefly tell us about what we do and why we are here. You're welcome, Christina.
Thank you so much. I was actually not planning to speak about the Deal Flow Facility, but happy to do that also. So the European Union in Uganda is proud to support the Deal Flow Facility implementing by our partners from financial sector Deepening Uganda, which is a matchmaking facility between investable businesses and entrepreneurs and investors in the private equity and venture capital space, so non-banking financing. And they're doing an excellent job, but this morning we've had a very interesting deals room. And a very successful one as far as I could tell. But I just wanted, if I may, to say a few words about the importance of corporate governance for SMEs. So first of all, a big thank you to you, the Deal Flow Facility team, for organizing this. I think it's a very topical subject because one thing we all know is that strong businesses need strong governance systems. And right now, from a development partner perspective, we do expect the private sector to chip in quite a lot in the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And we want it to grow and participate in delivering development results, so helping us, the development partners, in achieving those results. So particularly the SME sector, they are the backbone of our economies and the drivers of innovation, as we could see throughout the day, and the largest employers across many regions. But for SMEs to unlock their full potential, they need one thing, and that is capital. And I think many of you are looking for that here today and tomorrow. And the truth is, investors aren't short of capital. They are short of trust. And trust is built on good governance. Furthermore, today we are living in a very volatile, uncertain, and complex and ambiguous world, a VUCA world as it's called. We are dealing with economic and political shifts that disrupt markets overnight, with regulatory challenges that redefine the way we do business, and climate risks that threaten supply chains. We also, as we could see, deal with technological disruptions that can make or break industries. So in this kind of world, SMEs cannot afford to wing it. Success isn't just about having a great product or service. It's mostly about resilience, adaptability, and strategic decision making, all of which are enabled by strong governance systems. So governance isn't just a bureaucratic burden, and some of you may feel it. It is a competitive advantage. Investors are looking for transparency and accountability. Consumers value more and more ethics and sustainability. And employees thrive in structured and well-led organizations. And with that, I think I'll stop here, because I was supposed to only be here for 3 minutes, and I'll let the panel continue answering your questions. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Christina. Hand clap for her. And she said something that kind of hit home. Investors are not short of capital, but they are short of trust, which is something that most of our businesses, at least from our experience, corporate governance seems to be one of the biggest issues. So my question to the panel, the first question, is how can businesses go about setting up strong governance structures? We always hear about, okay, you need to get a board, but many times we get entrepreneurs asking, how do I choose the right board member? How do I even go about the process? What kind of support do I need to get to that point where I can say I have a good governance structure? And I'll start with you, Simon, and then take it on to Gladys and Pascal.
Thank you very much. So I think the emphasis here is on small, medium-sized enterprises. And this morning, I think we had a discussion that commercial enterprise is going to drive economic development, and the fact that we need to reset the confidence perception in Africa. And the same applies to enterprise, that the people we're dealing with are people of integrity and that we can trust. So when you start a business, enterprise, and I think in the dictionary, it's defined as a bold undertaking. You're going in to start a business, and a question has already been asked here about the cost of governance. But when you talk to investors and you ask them, what is the most critical investment criteria you look at in an investee? For the investors who've been doing this for years and years and hundreds of years, they will tell you it is management, the governance, that is the most important investment criteria. So when you keep that in mind as an entrepreneur, then you have to establish what you call the governance structure of an organization. Initially, you might say there is a cost element that you have to control, but you must establish the different roles of governance of an institution. And you can break it down into the shareholders, the board, management, and employees, and other stakeholders. Now, the enterprise is managed by management. But the oversight is the responsibility of the board. And I think in reality, when you have a small company or a small business, you cannot have a huge board in terms of size, but you should have a board that in most cases will have the promoter of the business or the shareholder, and you should also ensure that you look for an independent board member, because the oversight of that enterprise is important, and you are going to have to start keeping records, starting with the financial records. And as you know, with audited accounts, you clearly understand the responsibilities of directors to ensure that the financial statements are fair and true. So that's where it should start from. And for a small enterprise, the most important thing is the strategy, the vision and the strategy. And you start with a vision for the business, you start with a strategy for the business, but that strategy and vision should be aligned with the board and with management, because that's what is going to bring you together. That is the glue initially. And one could argue that we will not attract the best board members, etc., because of cost and reputation, but you still start the business and have board members. Some of them may be family board members, but what you have to ensure is the independence and understanding the role of the board, which is a very, very long topic. But align the strategy and the vision, then from there understand that the governance system will deliver the strategy. The controls of the business to ensure there's no fraud, to ensure there's no loss, the accountability, the transparency will ensure that you achieve the strategy of the business. If you start from that framework, then you will start on a solid foundation. So it comes down to two roles of a board member, and I'll give my colleagues time to speak. Performance of the organization and conformance. And the conformance, even for small organization, is compliance with taxation, for example. You don't want to reach 4 or 5 years down the road and the tax authority gives you arrears of millions of shillings. Performance, compliance, taxation, regulation with the regulators, and you start there and you align the vision and strategy with the board and management and employees. Let me stop there and then pass it on to my colleagues otherwise.
Over to you, Gladys. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. So corporate governance is more of a mindset. Unfortunately, what most small businesses think about is that it's rules and controls, and yes, that is part of it. But corporate governance should actually be more of a mindset, and the mindset that a small business should have is, I am building a business now. If I want this business to succeed in the next 5, 10, to be there for 20 years, what do I have to do in order for that business to be there in 20 years? And it's not just about building the sustainable or revenue-making business. It's what are the checks and balances that need to be in place that this business then can survive for the future, and that it can scale. And if I do want to sell that business, someone would want to sell it, would want to buy it. So corporate governance for small businesses, as Simon said, that was a pun, but as Simon said, it's about performance and conformance, yes, but now as a small business owner, how do you actually put that in place? So the roles and responsibilities of the board and clear roles and responsibilities of the management. And when we're talking about management, small businesses start off as a one person. Maybe it's your idea, you bring in your friend, or you bring in your brother. But as the company keeps growing, how do you make sure that you're making the right decisions for that business? Who do you consult? Who checks that you're making the right decisions? Do you say you're doing well? Who checks that for you? Do you decide for yourself that this is what I'm going to hit 10,000, and if I hit 8,000, that's good enough? So the role of a board is to help business owners and management stay true to their strategy, stay true to what they say they're going to do, and also work in tandem with the management to help them think forward, to help them think this is where you want your business to go, and this is what you have to do to get it in place. I'd like to hand over to Pascal now.
Okay, thank you so much. Ideally, when an organization is starting, it will be built on the power of what we call the strong man, the person who brought the idea, the person who thought about this, coming up with an idea and putting it to action. At that level, it is simple. Everything is in the hands of the founder. You do virtually everything. One time I did IT, HR, finance, everything. There is nothing in an organization that I've not done. However, as the organization starts to grow, new complications come in. And as you know, from the accounting perspective and from the legal perspective, an organization is actually independent of its owner or the shareholders. Even the day you die as the owner, the organization should be able to open and run and serve the people it is supposed to serve. Now, for it to be able to do that effectively and be able to run even when you are sleeping, it must be supported by clear structures, systems, policies, guidelines, and all those things. And legally, if an organization did anything wrong, the person who should be sued is actually the directors, legally. They are the ones who are responsible for running that organization. And that is something that many of the startups normally forget, that actually it is the directors responsible for the organization. So what happens is that as a founder, most likely you came from just the periphery, and no one can know everything about, and unless maybe you are like people who have been in it for 30, 40 years, 20, that you know everything across the organization. It's not possible. So when you're forming the board, so that reality is supposed to be able to shape your decisions on who you should be able to bring on board. Because you need a balance of knowledge. People from finance, people from audit, people from operation, people from governance itself. People should be able to add value. So one of the mistakes we normally do, I heard somebody talking about due diligence. When the due diligence is done, there are things that are checked. So somebody will say, no, we need a board. And somebody will appoint people to be board members. But when practically, they're not adding any value. For us to get the best of what an organization can offer, or from the business that we have started, the board members are supposed to be able to add value. They should be able to support us in those areas where we are not good, or to be able to act as handbrakes in whatever we are doing. As I mentioned earlier, that an organization is independent, a business is independent of its owners, legally. Therefore, you need people who can bring that balance. Sometimes I know when we sit in the board, we have those voices that are saying, that is too ambitious, or that is too slow, or that is too risky. But such kind of questions or points cannot be raised unless the members really know what they are talking about. And when we talk about governance, the board is just one of it. But generally, how do we manage everything end to end, whether it is systems, structures, policies? And at that level, you can do it as a simple board where you have your 5 or 3 or 2 members. Normally, we need an odd number. But later on, as the business grows, you may also need to break it down into committees which are specialized, for either finance, ALCO, or audit, or risk and compliance, but that comes with growth, so that you can be able to get the guidance and support that management needs to be able to deliver the mandate of the organization. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Pascal. The next, I'll put this out to Simon. We've spoken about why we need a board, why we need a strong governance structure, why it's about the mindset. We've talked, we've said so many things, but what we've not talked about is, as an entrepreneur, how do I choose the right board member? How do I know that Simon is right for my company and will add value as opposed to Pascal or to Gladys? What do I need to do to make sure that I have the right people to, quote unquote, spearhead the overall governance of the company?
And that is a very good question, because that's where the rubber hits the road in reality, especially for small, medium-sized companies. The promoter or the shareholder usually wants to choose people they're comfortable with in reality to serve on their board. And I think it is important that you understand the role of the board and the choices you make. And what we now call board dynamics is when you actually sit on the board. And when you sit on many boards, there's what you call board dynamics in some cases where the promoter or shareholder has power over the other board members, and they become rubber stamps, which is not correct. So, number one, I think there's a lot of training required on this subject for entrepreneurs to understand the role of the board. But having understood the role of the board, there's understanding the dynamics of the entity and how meetings are run, respect how decisions are made. So you've got to reach a point where management has its role, but it's independent of the board. It comes with factual paper. It comes with papers to the board where there are policies that the board has approved, and the board has to consider those policies. Now, what that does is that it eases the decision-making of the board, so that to a large extent, even if you're a small company and you've brought your friends on board, you're giving them the independence to make decisions. Because the number one issue that you have to understand is decisions are made in the interest of that entity, not you. I think that's one thing you have to be very clear about. Decisions are made in the best interest of the organization. The shareholder may want 90% of the dividends paid out that year, but if management and comes and says, I don't think we should pay you 90%, I think we need to plow back, for example, 60%, because that is in the best interest of the organization. And the other board members should be independent, objective, and fair to ensure that the decision is made in the interest of the board. Number two, management should not capture the board should not capture management. So you have to respect the role of management, and you have to respect the role of the board. So the dynamics is really building confidence and a culture of attitudes and behavior so that board members are independent, they have an ability to anticipate, they have an ability to challenge, they have an ability to interpret, they have ability to create controls that provide independent and objective information, which may include internal auditors or external auditors. So, key that the board is not a rubber stamp. And two, that the board makes decisions in the interest of that animal that we have created. Those are the two keys. Maybe you guys can add on.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. And earlier on, someone mentioned something about entrepreneurs, the relationship between entrepreneurs and the board and all of that. Because as an entrepreneur, you're running a business, but you have all these stakeholders. And someone earlier mentioned that we are all here to look for capital. So I will put this over to you, Gladys, having sat on both sides of the bench as an entrepreneur, as an investor, and now sitting on the board of NCBA. How would you advise entrepreneurs to manage the relationship between their investors and the board, so that at the end of the day, there is no friction between the board, the investor, and also the management team, and of course, the entrepreneur themselves?
Brilliant question, Brenda. And it is something that will always be a work in progress, because each of those three stakeholders has their interests. So from the get-go, if you do not understand what the board is interested in, what's the board's core mandate, oversight, and to make sure that the company is being run right. What is the investor's interest? To get a return on investment, but they can't get a return on investment if the company isn't being run right. What is the entrepreneur's concern? To have a going concern, to have the business also get successful. Now, all of these can be achieved, but in different ways. But you need to find the common ground, but also find out what concerns each of the three parties. Now, as an entrepreneur and as a business owner or an operator, you're charged with the day-to-day management and day-to-day operations of the company. The board comes in once in a while, and the investors, of course, also get monthly reports, or should be getting monthly reports. I don't know if you're giving your investors monthly reports. But the first thing is, across the three, there needs to be transparency. There needs to be transparency in what is going on in the business. There needs to be transparency in terms of reporting, and that's on the financial, operational, and when we're talking operational, that's also in terms of the team, that's also in terms of your customers as well. So one of the ways transparency is core to managing the relationship between the three. So your investors do need to meet with need to know your board members, but because your board members have to be objective enough, you have to ensure that their objectivity is not swayed by investor interests. And that goes back to how you select your board members as well. Most investors will ask for a seat on the board to make sure that their interests are covered. So you must also be aware of that voice, that when an investor is speaking up and the questions that they're asking, are they doing it for the business or also to protect their own interests as an investor, which rightfully so, they should. So as an entrepreneur, if you don't understand what your investor needs, and if you're not giving them the necessary information, and then they find out much later, you'll have a problem. If you don't let your board guide you, and sometimes your board will have investors, but it will also have independent members who are not investors. You also have to keep them updated on what is required, because as life and as business happens, there's always going to be a crisis at one point or another, whether it's regulation, whether it's the tax authority, whether it's customers, whether it's competition. So all of these people have a role to play in making you build a successful business. But I'd go down to saying transparency, frequent updates, but not too many updates that now they're involved in the day-to-day running of the business. So you need to be able to strike that balance. When it comes down to strategic insights, when it comes down to strategic decisions, do you give them enough information to help them help you? And what that means is, do you need an introduction to someone to help you with your distribution? Can your investor help? Can your board member help? Everyone wants to feel useful. And as entrepreneurs, you need to reach out to your board and to your investors as much as they are useful to you. So you need to know what they're good for. Don't waste people's time with things that they're not good for or good at. So it's easy enough. It's not easy to manage that relationship if you are not transparent and if you're not willing to take accountability as well. So the two things that you need to hack are the transparency and the accountability in managing that relationship. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you raise a very valid point, Gladys, and this ties into what Christina said earlier about investors having the capital but not having trust. There cannot be trust if there is no transparency, right? So I think that's a very good point. We'll keep the questions. We'll have a Q&A session later. So Pascal, you are a founder. You sit on the board and you've been in the finance space for a while. What would you say are some of the friction areas that you have struggled with as a founder? What are those things that you feel when the board comes to you, you want to pull off your hair?
Of course, the issue of expectations. As she mentioned, different stakeholders ranging from the financiers, the staff members, the board members, even the community. There are so many different expectations of us as an organization. And many times to be able to balance these expectations is one of the biggest challenges that will cause friction. For example, at the board level, you'll sit, look at the strategy, say, we would like to grow by this percentage. You'll give very serious targets, which must be achieved in terms of maybe profitability and other aspects of the organization. So you'll find that now the staff members themselves, they also have their own, for example, expectations. Maybe salaries have not been growing and they are seeing these numbers. You want a 30% growth, but they just want a 5% increase. So many times you'll find that you are at the board level and there are so many pulling forces. The owners of the organization needs a return. The staff members need this. And to balance that, sometimes even other forms of investments, we want to grow by this percentage in terms of outreach, but we need to improve maybe a certain technology. So all the time there will be a conflict around resources and how we deploy these resources and at what stage. So that is something that at the board level you need to manage very, very well. Otherwise, you need everybody aligned and you take care in a very calculated manner the interests of all parties. And in that way, you are able to diffuse some of those conflicts and the straining pain points at the board level. Thank you.
Yeah, Gladys, you want to expound?
Thank you. In addition to the expectations, there is always that friction between, for investors want the business to grow at whatever, because they're looking for their return. And then you find that as a business owner, as the person in the business, you know that it's really unrealistic. Some of these things are unrealistic, at least not in the time frame that is given. So that is one of the friction areas where you find that some entrepreneurs end up expanding into markets or doing things that they really have no business doing because there's pressure from an investor who wants a certain return X. And this is where also the board can come in and help. Because if the board is well aware of what's on the ground, and if the board is objective enough, and I think it was, yes, Pascal mentioned it earlier, when a business fails, people will ask who are the board members? Of course, the investors, they had a failed investment, but the people who end up with a lot of egg on their face are the board and the business owner. So there is that's a common friction that I have observed, especially in the private sector in terms of investors, the pressure to scale. And then you find business owners also starting to fudge numbers to meet investor expectations or to even attract more financing. And yet a board of directors, part of the role is to say, hold on, what is this that we're promising? What is this that we're saying we can do? So that's actually part of the role of a board. The board can help set more realistic expectations and help manage that relationship, that friction between an investor and the entrepreneur. But going back to who is on your board, if they're not yes people, then you stand a better chance of having them help you build a case of manageable growth.
Staying on that topic of who is on the board, I'll put this out to Simon. We've interacted with businesses that struggle with, setting up, they're like, someone talked about the financial implications or the resources around having a full-time board. What is the difference between a fully registered board and an advisory board? And is it okay for an entrepreneur starting out to, for example, have an advisory board as opposed to having a fully registered board?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, because there's always the reality of the operating environment as an entrepreneur when you start a business. I think what you have to understand as an entrepreneur is that if you have the vision to grow your business, there's a point in time you will look for capital from outside. And the question you have to ask yourself is, what are the investors going to be looking for in this enterprise? Even if it's 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, I think you have to understand that you aspire at one point for more capital to come into the business, whether it's equity, even if it's debt, and they will ask a number of questions. So when you're starting the business, at some point it may be costly to have you could have a small board, but you could also call your mentors to advise you, to have an advisory committee. And what you're trying to do at that point is to conform. Keep records. I have to repeat that. Keep records, start the culture of audited financial statements, because, even if, I remember starting my own business, even if the revenue is as small as it can be, do not be embarrassed to have audited financial statements and grow those statements. Put systems in place of control. Have what you call a combined assurance or reassurance program, where your assurance comes from the controls of the organization, which are, the board or advisory board or board committees or internal controls or the reporting framework. Because you can break it down into three components of the vision. You conform, then you aspire. Then there's convergence. Because even the largest companies started from somewhere. So, yes, it's an excuse when you're small that sometimes you can't afford board members, you can't have the board members on board. Some of the good board members will not allow to come on your board. There are cases where young people invite, board members and they say, you know what, I've been burnt before. I don't think I can do this, but I think I can support you as an advisor. So that's why that question is relevant. So start by conforming, knowing that in future, you will have an opportunity to look for investors. And all investors all over the world want the same thing. They want integrity, transparency, accountability. They want a good rate of return, and they want predictability.
Okay, thank you so much, Simon, for that. Over to you, Gladys. As an independent, I hope I got this right. You are an independent board member, right, for NCBA Bank in Uganda. What is the role of an independent when you say you're an independent board member? What are you independent of, just so to say? Yeah.
Okay, let me just take the example. Pascal is chairman of the board, but also the founder of his company. He's not independent. So that's the first thing. If for most organizations, if you are at an executive level, but you're also on the board and you're working in that company, you're not independent because you are involved in the day-to-day operations. So Pascal is not independent, and I am independent because I only sit on the board. I serve on the board. I am not involved in the day-to-day operations. Usually you will find that for most companies, one or two senior management members will be part of the executive, or part of the executive team will also sit on the board. So they'll be non-independent because they know too much about the business. It's also hard to ask them to be objective enough. So being an independent board, independent director, and sometimes I even go as far as saying independent non-executive. So that means I'm not sitting on the executive, I'm not an part of the executive committee of the organization. So being independent means I am not involved in the day-to-day running. I only serve on the board to provide oversight, to challenge and support management in their day-to-day operations. I hope that's clear.
Maybe just to add on.
Okay.
Yeah. So there are three types of board members. Independent non-executive director, like Gladys has mentioned. Non-executive director, you may have shareholding, and then executive director. Yeah.
I feel like you've just confused us.
Yes, maybe I can add on something.
Yes.
Okay, the independent versus non-independent.
Yes.
Many times we just talk about the independent one. The assumption is that in a legalistic environment, the assumption is that it's a company with shareholders, they vote amongst themselves who to lead this organization on their behalf. But good corporate governance principles require us to also have people who are independent. They are not shareholders, they are not on management, to neutralize the excesses that come with the people who are non-independent. If I'm a shareholder, and we are about to take a very serious, I'm thinking very deeply, I'm looking at how much money I'm going to make at the end of the year. But at the same time, there are very critical investments that need to be made. So I need to be a group of people whom I listen to, whom I respect, who can say, Pascal, no. And they don't have any stake. And many times, there are people at that level, they are not looking for an income, they are coming to serve. You're just paying them for sitting allowance and others. So that's why even the kind of people you bring on board also matters, not just rubber stamping. People who can say no. Then we also have what we call executive and non-executive. On the board, a board ideally is supposed to be coming in periodically to check. But the board can say, no, amongst ourselves, we need somebody to sit on management daily to watch what they are doing. And sometimes that executive director, a director but executive, sitting on management, can be given a portfolio to handle. You are an executive director, but also in charge of ICT or chief technology something. So that you are not just only watching, but you are also adding value through your professional expertise. So you are, all the time you'll come across independent, non-independent, executive, and then also plain. Somebody is just a board member and they wait, either in the committee or in the full board when they they do their work. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. Just one more for Simon before we open it up to the audience. How would you advise entrepreneurs to handle conflict? Conflict between investors, the board, or even conflict between themselves and the board that is governing them?
Okay, so conflict, and it's bound to happen in business. So conflict between management and the board, for example. Usually that conflict comes when there is no alignment on strategy, or the board feels that management is not providing open and transparent information. So the way you resolve conflict in most organizations is that you should try and ensure that you have policies and procedures for everything that you are doing. Whether it's financial management, there's a policy. Whether it's risk management, there's a policy. These policies are designed by management, brought to the board, and approved by the board. So it's a partnership. What that does is that everything management does is according to the policy and can be defended from that perspective, that I am doing this according to the policy and this policy was approved by the board. So as much as possible, that reduces the conflict when everything that you do is formalized and there are systems. Actually, these are all called systems in organizations. Systems. There's a strategic plan. The board approves the plan, and the board is supposed to monitor the implementation of the plan. So your issue as management is to ensure that you are implementing the plan and reporting on a timely basis to the board, and reporting the variances, because there are always variances between the actual and the plan. So what that does is the board begins to trust you, and you also know that you're operating on formal systems. So that usually reduces the conflict. Shareholders, other stakeholders, I think it's important, first of all, in your strategic plans, that you identify who your stakeholders are. All the strategic plans I look at, I must make sure that I identify who my stakeholders are, what I do for them, and what they're supposed to do for me. So, for example, it could be government taxation, shareholders, AGM. So, if you identify, your clients, your customers. So, if you identify all your stakeholders and you understand what you're supposed to do for them and what they're supposed to do for you in the strategy, then again that reduces the potential conflict you may have, whether it's paying taxes on time or how much taxes, whether it's policy issues, whether it's dealing with your customers. So as much as possible, you preempt conflict. It doesn't mean there will be no conflict, but I think the point is that you have to have systems that you can refer to manage the conflict. And it's a dynamic situation. You must review your systems, you must always review your controls. All those policies are up for review every year or so. They are not static. So that's how the system is oiled to ensure conflict management is taken into consideration.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think we'll open it up to the room now. Bobo? So if you have any questions, comments, contribution, or if you want to supplement any of the points from the panel, please feel free. This is a learning session.
First and foremost, before I get to my question, thank you so much for putting into context a lot of things, especially with the conflict situation. I think boards tend to get very heated when performance, aka the money, is not making sense. So it tends to get very, very heated. So how do you unpersonalize? Because they say everything is personal, right? So how do you unpersonalize board interactions? Or how do you take that feedback so that in a way that's not personal? My name is Dama, and I'm from Corporate Market Masters Limited.
Joseph from the Africa Leadership Academy. Maybe just to add on to what she asked, exit. So there is conflict. How do you exit as a board member, or how does the leadership of the board exit a member in a way that doesn't mess up cohesiveness of the team?
Okay, thank you so much. That's a good one. There's a question at the back. Olivia.
Hi, I'm Olivia Bianyuma. I'm an investor in the region. I work with Nordic Impact Funds. This question is for everyone in the room who has worked with an independent board member. Many times we invest in local companies, and it's really difficult to find independent board members to sit on the boards of our portfolio companies. Is there any tried and tested ways of finding good local independent board members, or trainings, or I don't know? How do you guys find good board members?
Good question.
So my name is Favor. I'm from Synapis Ascent. I've been both the founder operator and on the investor side. And to the board question that she raised, how do you structure a board for businesses that need an exit? I say this because many equity funds in our region struggle with exits, especially for entrepreneurs who took earlier stage rounds or the business isn't posited for the expected exits.
Okay, let's take one more, and then we will have the panelists answer before we forget the questions, and then we'll take another round. Just park them for the next round.
Yeah, my name is Ronnie. I'm from BOPINC, which is a BOP Innovation Center. My question is, when you talked about building that sort of trust with organizations, a lot of for-profit organizations that are not typically required to have a board are finding themselves in places where, funders are requesting for a board to at least, have that sort of trust building. What would you say about that?
Okay, so I'm just going to thank you. Let's park the rest for the next round of questions. We have 5 questions, so I'll just distribute them, hoping my ancestors guide me correctly. The first question is, how do you unpersonalize board interactions? I will hand that over to you, Pascal.
Just like Chairman mentioned, sometimes the appointment can be the people you know, your friends. Sometimes, because everybody, one of the realities of life, I remember in one of the articles on Yahoo Business, they say that many people the power of relationship. You tend to like to work with people you know, even if they're not offering the best. Simply because we tend to avoid, as human beings, situations that will bring us problems. So unpersonalizing relationships can only be done by making sure that you harmonize and level expectations from the word go. And how do we do that? Is that at the level of enrollment or bringing somebody on board, the terms of reference must be very clear. And that takes us to the issue of the board charter. You need a board charter or just simply a policy that manages this relationship. When does the term start? When does it end? For what period of time? How can it be stopped? How can it be extended? All those things are put in the policy, and if you do them very well, and even explain when do we have meetings, how many meetings are these, And what do we discuss in these meetings? All those things are normally put in the charter, and if you follow them very well to the dot, you will not have any issues. Even if it is your wife who is a board member, as long as it is very well leveled, the discussions will tend to follow the right thing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pascal.
Maybe just add on to that.
Okay, thank you.
And sometimes when you don't want to personalize it, you can have trainings. It's good. You can also have appraisals so that you don't have to tell your wife the truth and suffer the consequences. So you can have independent appraisals where these things come out and they could be anonymous. And then you learn, that people actually think that you are not, for example, you're a board member who doesn't listen, and they will tell you on paper, but they can't tell you in front of your face. Just wanted to add that too.
Yeah. Thank you for supplementing. And Simon, I'll put the next question to you. As someone asked about exiting board members, for example, you have 5 and 1 needs to go, right? What is the best practice around exiting board members for management and also for the board at large?
Okay, so this also feeds into the appraisal system for board members, but also for large organizations, there are rules that you should not be a board member for more than 9 years. 9. Sometimes time flies. Is that too long or too short?
Sounds long, right?
It sounds long, yeah.
Yeah,
but
sounds long.
Usually it's 9 years, and you have to exit. If it's because of reasons of non-performance, I assume, then it should not be personalized. I think this appraisal system in place should be the basis of the exit. If you want to avoid, some of the stresses that come with, and sometimes this happens in small enterprises where you have conflict. But as much as possible, I think you should depend on formal systems that ensure a clean exit from the board.
So would this be, for example, part of the charter that Pascal talked about? Do you highlight some of these expectations in the charter?
Yes, you do. You highlight them in the charter. You go through board trainings, corporate governance trainings, and you go through appraisals. And then if it doesn't work and you have to exit the member, then there's a basis for that.
Okay.
I can add on something small.
Okay.
As entrepreneurs, it's normally possible that you can be very impatient. The anger, the emotion sometimes attached to certain things makes us to do things that ordinarily we should not be doing. Remember, if you have somebody at the board level, there is that element of courtesy. And how does that person exit it has a lot of implications. First of all, on the goodwill. Goodwill is also an asset in its own. Yeah. So what do you want this person to talk about? You have seen situations where investors come, or donors, or funders, and they want to talk to former board members, past members. What are they going to talk about you? Do you have their goodwill? So it is something that also has to be managed very, very tactically, in a manner that you have to really be very patient. Sometimes we'll have to wait until the term ends. And that's why you will find that many organizations will say 3 years, or others 2, others 4, so that to be able to take care of that risk. Because there will be situations when you have a board member and maybe they can't even attend board meetings or they can't add value, and somehow they have to exit. But the exit, and sometimes it can degenerate into a legal battle because it has issues to do with the image of that person whom you are exiting. So it has to be managed very, very well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for raising that. I think that's a very valid point. And the next question was on, I'll hand this over to you, Gladys, as the independent board member specialist in the room. Olivia asked a very valid question, and Gladys will answer, but I'll also open it up to the room. Where do you get good independent board members? Clearly, there's a struggle. So where do entrepreneurs go? Where do investors go to get good independent board members?
Great question, Olivia. Good to see you. And I think one of the things is there's this image, a personal experience. I have been told I don't look like a board member. I wonder why. Why would anyone think I don't look like a board member? But there is a certain image that board members initially have, you know? There's something that the world has that this is what a board member should look like. But times have changed. The way businesses are running has changed. And the fact that small businesses are required to have better corporate governance means that even the kind of directors that people are looking for may change a bit. Your director should no longer be an old gray-haired gentleman, you know.
Thank God no one on the panel has gray hair.
No, but that was the image. When people are thinking about board directors, they think a lot of experience. Of course, experience is good and expertise, but the world is changing so much faster now, especially in the digital age, and with such a young population, many businesses are developing products and solutions for a younger market. So when we used to think about directors, we thought you needed to have a certain age, X number of years, maybe you've retired, but that's actually one of the challenges that businesses have. You have to redefine what kind of director you need for your business. It's a digital age, it's a digital economy. Who is going to understand that better? Who is going to understand that better? And where are you going to find those people? So first off is for investors, when you have your portfolio companies, you need to look around in the industry and see who are the leaders in that industry. Are they in another organization that is not a conflict of interest, that will not be a conflict of interest for them? Because sometimes that director that you bring in could actually end up being a future leader of that company. So that's also another angle to take. There's the League of East African Directors, which provides a lot of trainings as well. People opt in and they pay to become members of that. And you'll find people who are not yet directors but have an interest, professionals who now want to start serving on boards. You can find them there. You can come to events such as this and ask the question that you did. In the next month, you're going to have a director or two, for sure. But it's a lot about networking, but also asking ourselves that what is the role of a director and what kind of director does the organization need? So it's networking, it's looking in the industry, it's looking at people who actually want to share knowledge as well. And these events are really good as well for that. If you don't find someone here, at least someone else will be able to point you in the right direction. And then I will hand it over to the audience on that.
Anyone else have something to say? And you mentioned something, Gladys, when you speak to people of a certain age, part of their retirement plan is to retire on two boards. And, you know, when you talk of the digital era, I don't know if that is still something that they should aspire for. So anyone else have a contribution? Olivia put this to everyone in the room. How do you get independent board members?
One of the pipeline sources that I've used in the past are there are a few training programs for board members. So they train ex-C-suite or fund operators who've been in the industry for over a decade. So take them through governance and board procedures, audit and advisory requirements. Then essentially they have thousands of ex-C-suite board members. So that's a pipeline as well.
My name is Kenneth Kabwe. I'm the founder of an agritech farm called Farm Sawa. I just wanted to ask, not on a board level, but then on the beginning of a foundering journey and where it involves co-founders, what policies or strategies would you advise to be employed just to avoid any founder explosions, as they're called? Because some may have good products, may have a good business model, but then obviously when you're starting a business, you're not fully sure on what you're going to get ahead. That may be in terms of effort, in terms of what is being put in. So what strategies would be best to be put in place before you start this to avoid a founder's explosion? Thank you.
So the next question was around structuring boards for exits, right? An investor it's time for the investor to exit the company. How ready is the board, and how do you structure a board to handle that kind of situation? I'll hand this over to you, Simon.
Thank you. And I think, to be clear, most investors that invest in small, medium-sized enterprises want to exit at some point, especially if it's equity. And usually it's 8 to 10 years. So that is usually made clear when they invest, that we are here to invest for a number of years and we shall exit. And sometimes the issue is how you're going to exit. Are you going to sell to management or an external party, management buyout, another investor buying, or IPO? So I think it's clear to the board that those investors will exit at some point. Now, if it is co-founders, then again, that's a different way of looking at it. They could be preemptive rights, so that the co-founder has to give preference to the existing shareholder. So sometimes that's in the agreement, and it should be clear if they're preemptive rights. And if they want to exit, then it becomes an issue of valuation and price, etc. So I think what I'm saying is it is important to preempt any conflict so that all those issues are, in the first place, addressed, so that when they happen, the board will have something that they can refer to and understand.
Okay, thank you so much. The next question was around NGOs and the issue around trust, right? Most times, because it's an NGO or a social enterprise, some people are not sure if they still need a board. I don't know, Gladys, what would you like to add to that?
On that part, I won't say I am the expert there, but in terms of trust building, anytime you're handling anyone's money, they just need to make sure that this money is going to be, it's not going to go build a house somewhere. So even whether for profit or not for profit, there is a certain level of accountability that is required. And maybe, I don't know, not for profit or social enterprise, if an advisory board can be used in the space, can be used as in the time that an organization is building up to a board, but there needs to be some checks and balances in place from people who are not in the day-to-day management. I would then like to hand over to, I think actually Pascal, because of your experience with Aga Khan, you'd be better placed.
Actually, the Companies Act that guide all of us, whether it's for profit or not for profit, company limited by guarantee, company limited by shares, is the same. Legally, all of them are required to have directors, people who are custodians of this organization. But in terms of how you run your family business, that's another issue, because you're not using anybody's money. If you want to have one director or two directors, whether they contribute or they don't, and you're just doing it for formality, that's up to you. But as long as you're going to be using someone else's money, and that's the case of NGOs, then the bar is even raised higher, that you really need to be seen to be accountable, you have to be transparent in everything you're doing, and you must be trusted. So there is even more need to have a much more stronger board in such an environment than an ordinary family enterprise. So that's how I would look at it. Just like our first speaker mentioned, that the resources are outside there a lot, but people who can be trusted, or organizations that can be trusted, are very little. So what a better way to showcase that you can be trusted than actually setting up a clear board that knows what you are doing. And for them to be able to know what we are doing, is about the interaction and how much reporting you provide, the committee meetings, the full board meetings, the AGM, how much disclosure do you make? And that will help the board to be able to support you at any time needed. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you could not have said it any better, but I'll still stay with you, Pascal, and this is our final question. Someone asked about you are a co-founder. So have you had any incidences of what he called founder explosions? And I think his question was, what are the strategies that founders can put in place to avoid founder explosions?
Okay, I'm hearing that word for the first time. However, we have what we call founder syndrome, where at one moment, you are really very, very useful to the organization. You've done your best, you have worked at night, but later, you actually become a problem to
I
the
think what he was talking about, and correct me if I'm wrong, when you're two founders, and then there's friction, you've started off with the same vision,
you
and
started
then along
very
the way,
well,
yes.
and that conflict will always be there, where someone thinks they have put in more, or you are actually overbearing. It will happen. But what I've seen, I've ever participated in startups which actually failed, very many. But one of the lessons I picked was that it is very easy for friends, relatives to come together to start, but they don't put their expectations on paper. You know, when you are registering a company, in Uganda currently, it's online. You can register a company with just one page. Everything is summarized in one page. But there is what we call the shareholders' agreement, which is a secret document, something completely sacred, where people sit down and agree, how are we going to handle this issue? Who has more powers? And that documentation is normally lacking for so many people. Later on, then they realize that actually they made a mistake, or they were cheated or something, and then the explosion will come in. So my advice is that constantly, people have come together to do something together. You need to level expectations from day one. And if possible, get the help of a lawyer to support you to document this. Because at one moment, it will come. For those of you who watched the movie, is it the Facebook? About Facebook. There was a movie about Facebook, how it started. It was so explosive. At one moment, they almost fought in office, fighting physically. And in one of the organizations where I worked, I saw in a school where founders almost fighting in the boardroom. One needs money just to pick and take. Another one wants to follow the procedure. So to avoid all that, now that you know, you need to make sure that it is properly documented. At what stage do we get money? How do we value? What does a share mean? At what stage do we review it? Such kind of things. Get a lawyer, that's not your area, and an accountant. They will help you to structure those things very well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. A hand clap for Simon, Pascal, and Gladys. At the Deal Flow Facility and as a knowledge partner for Sankalp, part of our mandate is really to build capacity, share information, learn from each other, and I'm sure all the entrepreneurs in the room have learned a thing or two. If anything, you've learned the word founder explosion, right? And how to avoid it. If there's anything you learned today, that should at least be something that you take home. I'll let the panelists just in 30 seconds give us a brief summary, and then we'll close the session. We'll have a photography moment with the panelists, but I'll start with Gladys and then bring it down to Simon.
Thank you. I was worried you were just going to let us go.
We didn't do that.
I'm very encouraged. I want to share this because I got very excited. The African Union, through the African Peer Review Mechanism, has released corporate governance guidelines for Africa. That a lot of what we've been learning about corporate governance has been from the West. And granted, the West has been ahead of us. But Africa's context has aligning it to Africa, that was missing. And this was something it was a project that was run for 2 years. It's available on the AU website, but it's corporate guidelines, corporate governance guidelines for African businesses. They're looking at multinationals, small businesses, family businesses, the informal sector, and they have actually stipulated that as far as they're concerned, all boards should be 50% female or women, which is, of course, being a woman, I'm very happy. But even for the men, they should be happy about that because of the diversity. Now, having diversity, having a diverse board and diverse perspectives is very, very useful for all companies. So I'd encourage everyone to have a look at that. I haven't gone through all of it, but I'm still very excited that it's out there for reference. And I wish you all the very best on this corporate governance journey. Don't forget, it is a journey. It keeps evolving as new regulations come up, as the economic environment and social environment changes. But the fact that you're in this room is a good start. All the best.
All right, thank you, Gladys. Over to you, Pascal. 30 seconds.
Thank you so much. This is what I would say as my parting shots. Whatever the situation it is in your company now, whether you are going up or you are going down or you are stagnating or you are struggling or you are celebrating, everything starts and ends with governance. The way your organization is governed will determine how it will grow. There's a lot of fear that, it is expensive, people will know what I'm doing, my secrets, this and this, but I can assure you, with proper governance, your organization is safe. It will go heights even in your absence. I normally tell people that even when we are not there working, there's a lot of things are going on, but they cannot go on unless policies, systems, structures are in place and there is a clear oversight structure that makes sure that these things are actually working. So an investment in your governance board is actually an investment in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pascal. And that's from a fellow entrepreneur. Over to you, Simon.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I'll conclude by saying that we should all understand that actually corporate governance is a source of value. It's a source of value. It's not a cost. We should also understand that enterprise is the way that will drive Africa's economic development. I think you can already see the changes in development partnership and grants and support. This is the only way. We must reset the perception that we are untrustworthy people, that we are an untrustworthy continent. Integrity is key. Integrity of information is key. And you cannot legislate integrity. It's not something that you can legislate. It's something that you must decide to have, and it is important for the success of your enterprise. Thank you.
All right. A big applause for our panel and a big hand clap to all of you for being a very wonderful audience. Thank you for the questions and thank you for giving us your time.